Hi, it's Steph, and we're at the Home Depot, and they look like they've restocked on some seasonally appropriate perennials. So let's go ahead and take a look at the late July inventory at the Home Depot. Check out this gorgeous penstemon. From afar, I actually thought that it was foxgloves. They are so pretty. They have a large bloom compared to some of the other penstemon varieties that I've seen, and this really pretty kind of baby pink with a white center and some purple striping. Gorgeous. And the pollinators absolutely love penstemon because they can get right into these bell-shaped blooms for some nectar. Now this variety is called beard tongue, which is another name for penstemon, Mountain Treats series, and it gets to be 20 to 24 inches in height, 18 to 24 inches in width, water when dry, and hardy down to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early to late summer. So that's the good thing about shopping at garden centers throughout the whole season. You can add perennials here and there to your garden that will keep your blooms going from spring through fall, but this is a real pretty one. Some yarrow. Now this is an excellent perennial. It loves sun and a well-draining soil that leans dry. So if you have drought conditions or you just want a plant that you don't have to worry about watering all the time, yarrow is a great candidate. The pollinators also love them, and they have these sort of flat bloom heads that are really a great contrast to other perennials in your flower borders, as well as the foliage, which has this kind of fern-like texture. So just all around really great perennial. Now some of the older varieties can get quite tall and require some staking because they're likely to flop over in heavy rains or in wind, but this Millie Rock variety is quite a bit shorter at only 10 to 12 inches in height and 14 to 16 inches in width, making it great for the front of a border. They also go through several color changes, so because these blooms age at different times, you'll get multiple different shades of that color on the same plant. So as you can tell, I really love yarrow. So $9.98 for these. They're in the Home Depot house brand containers. It is a perennial for full sun. And verbena adds such a beautiful pop of purple in your perennial borders. Now this is usually considered an annual. This variety lollipop is more likely to come back as perennial. In fact, I do believe they have it listed as a perennial for full sun. I have never planted this variety. It's what I hear. So if you have experience with the verbena lollipop, let us know down in the comments. I typically grow the verbena bonariensis that, like I said, is an annual, but it self-seeds prolifically, which means that even if you don't grow it every year, you are likely to have it back in your garden, which is okay by me because I love it. So this one gets to be 24 inches in height, so quite a bit more compact than the other verbena, which can get upwards of 4 feet in height. It needs 18 to 24 inch spacing. It is relatively narrow, water when dry, and it is hardy down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you do have an exceptionally cold winter, it's possible that it won't return the following season, but it may self-seed. And it blooms late spring through mid-fall. But you can see that this lollipop variety has a really great branching structure. But even the verbena bonariensis that I grow that is an annual, I can pinch it, meaning I cut it a few times, and then it will also start to branch and can be a bit fuller. But you can see it has this really beautiful shade of purple on it. The pollinators absolutely love it, and the way that they float above the other plants is just really beautiful. And here's the beauty that I actually purchased a few weeks back after many of you had told me that you love it. It is the Rose Marvel Salvia. This is a salvia that comes in this beautiful shade of rose pink, and it blooms for a really long time. So this one here does say that it will start blooming early to late summer, and it will continuously rebloom throughout the rest of the season. It's fairly short in height at only 10 to 12 inches in height and 12 to 14 inches in width, making it great for the front of a border. And salvia in general is really hardy. This one is also just as hardy at -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now salvia is going to want full sun and a well-draining soil, and it's an absolute pollinator magnet. Also, the deer and rabbit don't like the fragrance of it, so they leave it alone, which is another great reason to grow it. And another beauty that I just picked up from my garden about 2 weeks ago, it's the Pop Star balloon flower. Now balloon flowers are an excellent bloomer for your July garden, especially here in my zone 6B 7A, and they bloom for a really long time. They're also a lot of fun, especially for kids, because look at this. This is their bloom bud before they open up and bloom. and it's this puffy little ball that looks like a balloon. So a lot of fun for children. And it has tons of buds on it. This variety is relatively low growing. It's compact at only 8 inches in height, 8 to 10 inches in width, making it great for the front of a border. And it is hardy, very hardy, down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It wants full sun and it blooms early to late summer. Now these also come in shades of purple, but this light pink is sort of unique because you most often see the purple. There's in fact one in the back there that I'm going to show you. But I thought this one was really sweet and I picked up 3 of them. And these are in the Home Depot brand containers for $9.98. So here is the purple variety, and there are some taller varieties that sometimes have a tendency to flop because their stems can get quite heavy with the weight of all of these blooms. So if you want one that stays pretty compact and that would be less likely to flop, this variety is a good one. It is the Sentimental Blue, and it also stays 6 to 8 inches in height, needs 18-inch spacing, water when dry, and hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early to late summer, so this is a great one to add for that continual color throughout the season. Very easy to deadhead. All you do is take the bloom and pinch them right off, and that will clean up your plant and keep it producing blooms for longer instead of it signaling the plant to set seed. But also a really pretty shade of purple. Look at that. And if you garden in more shade, here is a plant that you can use. It is a stilby. Although this variety, the dark side of the moon with this beautiful dark foliage, has been bred to handle more sun. I will tell you that I've been growing this in my garden for a couple of seasons now, and if you do have it in more sun, you have to be sure that it gets ample water because it does have a tendency to crisp up the leaves. So if you are going to put it in sun, I would say morning sun is best because it's a bit softer and provide it some afternoon shade. You can see how it gets a little crispy in the foliage here. But otherwise, a beautiful perennial with this dark foliage would offer a lot of contrast in your perennial borders against all of the green in the garden. And it sends up these bloom stalks that look like these fuzzy plumes in a shade of kind of like a purple pink. Really pretty. So here are the specs on the dark side of the moon, a stilby. They want full sun, full shade, so we just talked about that. 20 to 22 inches in height, and they need 24 to 28 inch spacing. Hardy in zones 4 through 9 are down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and they bloom midsummer through late summer. And some rudbeckia, which is also another beauty for the mid to late summer garden, also known as black-eyed Susan. And this variety is gorgeous. You can see that it has that traditional golden color that the rudbeckia normally has, but it also has this splash of like burgundy coloration in the center. And it appears that some of the blooms have almost like a double layer of petals. And this variety is called, let's see, it is the Black-Eyed Susan Pawnee Spirit. It's a type of Rudbeckia hirta. It gets to be 15 to 24 inches in height, needs up to 24-inch spacing, water when dry, and it is hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms midsummer through fall. And they have these sort of fuzzy leaves, which is a great deterrent for deer and rabbit. They typically leave them alone. But a really pretty perennial to add a pop of color to the garden. It also pairs beautifully with purple or blue flowers, things like hyssop or even agastache. I grow the Blue Fortune variety next to my rudbeckia, and they make a beautiful pairing because the colors are opposite on the color wheel. And because I love to play with color pairings, look how pretty this lollipop verbena looks with this rudbeckia. That's just one example of a really complementary combination. Another beauty of the midsummer to late summer garden is the coneflower, also known as echinacea. And as you can see, they have no shortage of beautiful colors that they come in. So you can either add a few different ones to have a really colorful display, or you can find some that fit your garden color aesthetic. Now you can see this variety here might be the Cheyenne Spirit, which has multiple colors on one plant, from yellow to cream, orange, red, and pink. It's a really good one. The Cheyenne Spirit coneflower is an echinacea hybrid. It says that they're deer resistant and drought tolerant. All echinacea are going to be drought tolerant once established, and it blooms midsummer through fall. This variety gets to be 18 to 30 inches in height, needs 10 to 18 inch spacing, and hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now echinacea, like I mentioned, does want a full sun location and a very well draining soil. If they sit in too much moisture, they can rot at the crown and then you'll lose your plant. I also do find them to be deer resistant in my garden. I believe that the deer do not like this kind of rough texture of the cones, but the bunnies will sometimes munch on the bloom buds that they can get to down below, whatever they can reach. But if you spray them with a deer and rabbit repellent, they are usually just fine. They don't seem to bother them too much in my garden. And because they have these large, beautiful cones, they provide winter interest. You can leave them up after they're done blooming. The goldfinches, the birds, like to snack on their seeds, and they provide something to look at throughout the winter. They also have the powwow white coneflowers, which I actually grew from seed this year using the winter sowing method, and it works really well. I grew a batch last year as well, and they're actually blooming right now. And this variety also attracts butterflies. They are a great pollinator attracting plant with the upright habit, full sun, drought tolerant once established, and these get 20 to 24 inches in height, 16 to 18 inches in width, and hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. I quite like the look of the white coneflowers, and they oftentimes will bloom quite a bit longer than the traditional Shasta daisies. So a really great option and an alternative to Shastas if you prefer something that will bloom even a little bit longer than the daisy. Another great variety is the powwow wildberry. I also have quite a bit of these in my garden. I absolutely love them. They have a beautiful pink, vibrant pink coloration, and when they start blooming, they're so eye-catching. Here's the name there, powwow wildberry, Echinacea purpurea variety, and this one gets to be also 20 to 24 inches in height, 16 to 18 inches in width. Another great midsummer to late summer bloomer is your perennial alliums. Now these are a clumping allium, which are different than the ones that you plant as bulbs in fall and bloom in spring. There are so many different varieties on the market at this point that bloom at different times, have different heights, and even come in different colors. This one is called Summer Beauty, and you can see it has a light lavender purple color. The stems are quite a bit taller than some of the other varieties I've grown, such as the Millennium, and just a really pretty plant to mix into your perennial borders. Because they are part of the onion family, deer and rabbit, leave them alone. They do like full sun. They're actually called an ornamental onion, and this variety is the Summer Beauty. They're easy to grow, attract butterflies, and have a clumping habit, and they bloom late summer through fall. This variety gets to be 22 to 24 inches in height, and they need 12 to 15 inch spacing. Very hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are in the Vigoro container for $10.98. Now you can see how they grow in a clump. Very easy to divide. You could take this home, divide it in several clumps, and the plant will be much smaller this year, but it'll double in size each year, and probably by year 3 you'll have a bunch of clumps, and you only pay $10.98 for one container. Or if you want to have a great plant right from the start, just pick up a couple of them and plant them in groups. I find they look better planted in groups of, say, 3, 5, etc. And this variety is the Millennium, which is the one that I have getting ready to bloom in my garden right now. $10.98 for 2.5 quart container. Attracts butterflies, long blooming. Even when they're done blooming, if you leave the seed head up, they dry out and look really interesting. Again, they want full sun, and this one is quite a bit shorter at 12 to 15 inches in height. Needs 12 to 15 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms mid to late summer. They still have some of the opening act Pinkadot phlox in stock, and this is a really pretty kind of light pink lavender with a pink eye in the center. A really great variety. It's a newer variety as of the last several years, which means they're more resistant to powdery mildew, which phlox is very prone to. So it's very important to pay attention to spacing requirements for plants like phlox and monarda or bee balm, because those are the plants that if they don't have proper airflow around them, they are more prone to powdery mildew. But this one here is a great variety, blooms for a really long time, has a medium height of 22 to 26 inches, needs 30 to 36 inch spacing, and hardy in zones 4 through 8. Now, most varieties of garden phlox are going to want full sun. If you do garden in more shade, you still have some options with the creeping phlox, which is more of a ground cover in the early spring, as well as some woodland phlox varieties. But these are in a number 3 container for $24.98. It's quite a large plant, so it would be perfect to divide. You could probably get at least 3 perennials out of that right out of the container. And hardy hibiscus, another excellent bloomer for the late summer garden. Mine here in my zone 6B7A blooms in August, and I always look forward to it because they have the largest, most beautiful tropical looking flowers that are as big as a dinner plate. Beautiful. And this one has a little bit of darkness to its foliage, but there are some varieties that have even darker foliage, which adds another level of interest. Now let's see which one this one is. Now these do like a moist soil, so if you have an area that stays a little bit moist, this would be a great candidate to plant there. While these are perennial, they get quite large, probably the size of a shrub, most of them reaching about 4 to 5 feet in height and in width. And this is the Berry Awesome Hibiscus, the summerific line. It wants full sun to part sun. This one says that it does get about 48 inches in height and it needs 54 to 60 inches in spacing. Hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms midsummer through early fall, full to part sun. And there is one bloom here that you can look at. Look how pretty that is. Very tropical. This would be great to plant on a patio, by a swimming pool, and they do usually break dormancy quite late in spring. So say you add one to your garden for the first time this year and you start getting worried when you don't see it in the spring, just wait. Mine usually doesn't start popping through the soil until mid to late May. And a shrub with some really interesting color. This is a nandina called Flirt. Now, nandina is also known as heavenly bamboo, but unlike the bamboo that can get quite carried away and send out runners, this one is more well behaved. Now, in some areas, they do form berries. Here in the Northeast, I do not believe they form berries. Perhaps in a bit warmer climate, they might. I'm not sure what the trick is behind that, but these have some really beautiful coloration in the foliage. You can see multicolors from yellows and reds to shades of green. It looks like the new foliage emerges in this really vibrant red color. Now, some varieties are also pretty compact, making them great for, say, like the front of a border. So this one here says that it is dwarf, grows only 1 to 2 feet tall. It likes part shade, and it gets to be 1 to 2 feet in height, 1.5 to 2 feet in width. Hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit or USDA growing zone 6 through 10. These are part of the Southern Living Plant Collection, and they're in a number 3 container for $29.98. I showed you all this shrub in my garden in both my June and July garden tours, because in June it had bloomed with these really pretty light purple pink bell-shaped blooms, and now that the blooms are faded, the foliage gets much larger and it's very colorful. This is the My Monet Purple Effect weigela. It is a dwarf variety of weigela. Now in the tag here, or on the tag, it does read that it gets 1.5 to 2.5 tall and wide. I have been growing it for several years and mine is somewhere around 3 by 3. Still a really great compact sized shrub for most landscapes, but I really love this colorful foliage. It has kind of like a yellow and green coloration with a bit of red, almost pink on the outer margins. Really pretty. The My Monet Purple Effect weigela is hardy in zones 4 through 6 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it wants to be planted in full to part sun, so 4 to 6 plus hours of sun per day. And as I talked about, I've had mine for several years. It's probably averaging 3 by 3 in garden size, but the size will be very dependent on how happy it is in your garden. Now these here are in a number 2 container for $29.98. And if you like butterfly bushes, this is a good one. This is the Miss Molly butterfly bush, and it's a non-invasive species, which is something that's good to pay attention to with butterfly bushes, because many of the old varieties will set a lot of seed and you can get a bunch of seedlings around your garden, making them a little bit troublesome. Here is the specs on this variety. It is hardy in USDA growing zones 5 through 9 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It gets to be 4 to 5 feet tall and wide, so a nice great size for a butterfly bush, because another thing about these is that most varieties get quite large, upwards of 8 feet tall and wide, and it has these really pretty kind of like deep rose pink blooms. Now butterfly bushes are kind of late to break dormancy here in our zone. They usually don't start blooming until late May, sometimes even June, but then there is no shortage of blooms on this plant until your first hard frost. You can see there are some baby buds coming up right there, and periodically you can go through and just deadhead it by taking off these spent blooms and keeping your plant producing more bloom buds. I also find some of the varieties pretty fragrant. To me, they almost smell like lilac. The other thing about butterfly bushes is that they do want to be grown in full sun, and they want a very well draining soil. If they sit in too much moisture, they'll rot at the crown and then they won't return for you in your garden. I actually had that happen to me, so I learned from experience. And these here are in a number 2 container for $29.98. And some Russian sage. Now this is the Proven Winners Denim and Lace, which is a more compact variety of Russian sage. Some varieties can get upwards of 4 feet in height, and that can make them more prone to flopping in the center, especially during heavy rains or if they're not getting enough sun, and even during windy situations. So this one here is the Denim and Lace Pervoskia. They have a wonderful fragrance as well. This one was rated Perennial of the Year in 2020. Gets to be 28 to 32 inches in height and needs 34 to 38 inch spacing. It's hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it wants full sun. So those are the two things you need to grow Russian sage successfully: full sun in a very well draining soil. Ornamental grasses. Now ornamental grasses are excellent for adding texture and movement to your perennial borders. I absolutely love using them, especially some of these shorter varieties along the front of the border. This one is called Hamlin, and you can see that it's already sent up some of its bloom stalks, which are these fuzzy plumes. That is the blooms on ornamental grasses. They kind of look like wheat, so they transition your garden beautifully from late summer through fall. And the Hamlin is pretty compact. This one stays at about 24 inches in height and in width. I would say that's pretty accurate. So 2 by 2 in size, water when dry, and very hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It blooms early summer through fall, and as we talked about, the blooms are these fuzzy plumes. And they're just a really good option for that late summer interest in the garden. And if you wanted an ornamental grass for the front of the border that's even more compact than the Hamlin at about 2 by 2, the Piglet and the Little Bunny is another great option. And all ornamental grasses are going to want to be grown in full sun, with the exception of some that like shade, like the Japanese forest grass. And another beautiful clumping perennial allium, the Serendipity by Proven Winners. You can see how beautifully it contrasts with this rudbeckia right on the side of it. Now this one also has that more vibrant purple with a hint of pink to it. You can see this one is almost all in bloom, and that really interesting ball-shaped or sphere-shaped bloom head. And that strappy green foliage that also adds a lot of vertical interest in the garden and contrasts beautifully against other foliage. Look at it next to the rudbeckia there. Now the Serendipity, it gets to be 15 to 20 inches in height, making it great for the front of the border. It is a perennial. It's going to want full sun. It can do okay in part sun, but you'd probably want to give it at least 4 to 6 hours of sun per day. 10 to 15 inch spacing. It's hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms mid to late summer. And it says right there, full to part sun. Globe-like rosy purple flowers atop attractive blue foliage. Also pairs beautifully with rudbeckia. The Serendipity Allium is in the number 3 container for $24.98, and you can see that that is a pretty good size clump. So if I were purchasing this to bring home for my garden, I would split that into a minimum of 3 plants, which would give you some good size clumps, or you could do 5 plants. The clumps will be a little smaller, but they will pick up size in no time. But such a beautiful perennial. Now the rudbeckia that we see on the side of this Serendipity Allium is a more dainty variety. You can see that the blooms are smaller and there are lots of them. This is the rudbeckia, also known as Black-Eyed Susan Little Gold Star. It blooms midsummer through fall. It gets to be 14 to 16 inches in height, making them great for the front of a border. And they also want a well-draining soil that leans dry, so after they're established, you can back off on watering. Hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see there are tons of buds on this plant. Here's my yearly PSA as we get later into the season and these ornamental grasses start showing up in this gorgeous purple color. I just want to let you know that in most areas, the purple fountain grass is going to be an annual. I made this mistake when I was a newer gardener. I planted it out and I was so disappointed the following season when it didn't come back. I use these in my containers every year. They are gorgeous for that purple deep color and of course the movement and texture of a grass. They work beautifully in containers as well as in the landscape. But if you are in a zone up to say 9, chances are these are just annual for you. From a 9 through an 11, it's possible that they come back as perennial, but a really beautiful one, just don't plant it expecting it to return because a very well may not, depending where you're located. But $16.98 for this. You can probably divide it in 2 and use them for some fall containers if you are in an area where they're just annual. And the oxeye daisy, this is also known as a type of helianthus, and this variety is summer eclipse. Has these dark stems and dark green foliage with these golden yellow with a bit of an orange center, just a really pretty plant. So if you like hot colors in your garden, this is a good one. The oxeye daisy or Heliopsis summer eclipse is a long blooming, easy to grow upright habit perennial for full sun. These are $10.98 in the Vigoro containers, and they get to be 24 to 30 inches in height, 30 to 36 inch spacing, and hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. A gorgeous heuchera for a part shade to shade garden. I actually purchased this one here a few weeks back, planted it in my garden. It's doing beautifully. This is the Mega Caramel, and you can see how large the leaves are. So if you want to add a little bit of brightness to a shady quarter of the garden, this is a great way to do it. Heucheras are great. Ferns add a lot of texture, as well as hosta. There is some hosta on the side. Some of these are not looking the best. It looks like they got attacked by slugs, which you can always tell because there are holes in the leaves. And also they don't like a lot of sun. These might be getting a little too much sun, and some of the leaves have crisped up a little bit. But there are also some really pretty ones that still look to be in relatively good shape. And hosta also come in so many different colors and patterns as well as sizes. The only thing you need to know about hosta is if you do grow them, they're very cold tolerant, easy to divide, but the deer really like them. So you'd have to protect them by spraying them with a deer and rabbit repellent. But heuchera, nothing really seems to touch them in my garden. I also found that I have a little bit of a difficult time growing heuchera, but the caramel varieties do really well for me. So it would be a good one to try. The Mega Caramel heuchera gets to be 18 to 20 inches in height, needs 20 to 28 inch spacing, water when dry, and hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And they actually do bloom midsummer through fall. They will send up some bloom stalks with these sprays of really sweet flowers that look like baby's breath in shades of cream, peach, pink, depending on the variety of heuchera. And Coreopsis, an absolute bloom powerhouse. You can see how many buds are on this plant, and it's just starting to bloom. Now this variety is called, let's see, the Lil Bang Candy Stripe, and it's more unique than the traditional Coreopsis that you see that typically come in shades of yellow. This one has a striping effect with a soft yellow and a bit of sort of like a magenta pink, kind of a rosy color. Look at that. As it fades, it gets a little bit lighter. These are a great alternative to, say, something like a Cosmo. So if you like to grow Cosmos in the summertime, and Cosmos are an annual, this is like a perennial version. The buds and the blooms are very similar. Here are the specs for the Coreopsis Lil Bang Candy Stripe. It's a perennial for a full sun, and it gets to be 15 to 18 inches in height, 18 to 24 inches in width, water when dry, so they're pretty drought tolerant once established, and they're hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. They bloom early summer through fall. And another variety of Coreopsis, this one is like a ray of sunshine. Look how bright that is. Also has a golden yellow color with a bit of maroon in the center, tons of buds. This one has more of that strappy foliage. Some Coreopsis has more of a thread leaf foliage that looks even more like the annual Cosmos. So this one is in a 1.5 gallon container for $14.98. It's called the Tickseed Solana Sunset Bright, and it is deer resistant, easy to grow, upright perennial, blooms early summer through fall, and this one gets to be 15 to 20 inches in height and needs 18 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also getting to be sedum season, and I love sedums. Not only are they a super easy perennial to grow, they provide late summer and early fall interest. The pollinators absolutely love them, and because they're part of the succulent family, they have these large leaves that hold on to water, making them an excellent option for a drought-tolerant landscape. These are by the Bloomin' Easy brand. They're called Puff Pastry Raspberry Stone Crop, and they look like they get a rosy, deep pink kind of bloom. They like full sun. All sedums are going to want full sun in a well-draining soil in order for them to perform best. And they're hardy in zones 4 through 9. They get to be 12 to 14 inches in height and 14 to 16 inches in width. And these containers here are $12.98. Now this is the first time that I'm seeing Bloomin' Easy perennials at the garden center. Normally I see their roses, but this is a beauty, and look how gorgeous that looks right beside this dark colored sedum that we just reviewed. Isn't that so beautiful? It has so many petals, it almost looks like a mum, but it is a type of rudbeckia. It's called the Solar Sisters Black-Eyed Susan. It wants full sun. It's hardy in zones 7 through 9, and it gets 18 to 24 inches in height, 14 to 16 inches in width. Now, here's something worth mentioning. I'm in a zone 6B, 7A. This is hardy in zones 7 through 9. If I were to buy this plant and I had a really cold, wet winter, it's possible that this would not return for me next season. So that is a consideration you have to make when you're reading plant tags. Always pay attention to the zones, because just because something shows up at the garden center like those purple fountain grasses, they may not necessarily return in our gardens next season, even though they're listed as perennial, because the zone might be wrong. So something to pay attention to. Here's an upright type perennial that provides a vertical interest. However, I have heard from some of you that the obedient plant is not very obedient. So this one is called the False Dragonhead Crystal Peak White. It's a type of obedient plant. It does attract hummingbirds because of these blooms. You can see there they have very much like a penstemon or foxglove type bloom that's kind of bell-shaped, right? That they love to get in there and snack on. And it's easy to grow. It is spreading, so it does kind of tell you that there. So pay attention to that, right? It can grow in part sun, and it blooms early to late summer, 16 inches in height, 12 inches in width, hardy down to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So very hardy. This actually almost looks a little bit taller than 16 inches to me, but maybe it is 16 to 18 inches. Very pretty. Just be cautious if you plant it, because it might get a little carried away. But you can see how beautiful those blooms look. They also come in shades of pink. And a ground cover type perennial that I'm actually growing in my own garden and I really like, plumbago. Now, not only do they get these really beautiful kind of blue, they actually are a pretty true blue colored bloom, but they also get fall color. So as they're done blooming, we start transitioning to fall and the foliage gets red. So if you have a spot to tuck some of these ground cover in, a great option. So the plumbago, this variety here, it says that it gets to be 6 to 8 inches in height, needs 18-inch spacing, water when dry, and it is hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It blooms late summer through mid-fall. It does like part sun. And let me give you another shot of those really pretty blue flowers. And another excellent variety of sedum. This is the Rock and Grow Lemon Jade. This was one of the first Rock and Grow sedums that I added to my garden. I also have the Coral Jade. These are really pretty. Now this one gets kind of a lemony yellow coloration. You can see right here. Pairs beautifully with purple blooms, as you can see right in the photo. In fact, it is here at the garden center right next to some nepeta, and they look really pretty together. Again, sedum, excellent for a well-draining soil, full sun, very drought tolerant after it's established. The pollinators absolutely love it, and you're extending your bloom season by putting these in because they will bloom late summer through fall. So here it is, also super easy to divide, 16 to 18 inches in height, 26 to 28 inches in width, hardy in zones 3 through 9 or down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early fall, and it wants full sun. These are also really cold tolerant sedums in general. These are in a #1 container for $12.98. And right on the side of the sedum, you have a pollinator magnet. There are bees all over this nepeta, also known as catmint. It has a minty fragrance, and this variety is the Cat's Meow by Proven Winners. They also have the Cat's Pajamas, which is a little bit shorter than the Cat's Meow, but this one here gets to be 17 to 20 inches in height, and it needs 24 to 36 inch spacing. It's hardy in zones 3 through 8 or down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms early summer and through early fall. And it wants full sun. Now, nepeta will bloom for a really long time. It will start in late spring, some varieties, and if you deadhead it halfway through the season, once it's mostly done blooming, you'll see that some of the blooms look like that. It's time to give it a little bit of a haircut. They'll reflush out with new blooms and carry you through late summer, early fall. I am smelling the mint on this. I really like it. It's a really pleasant fragrance, and the deer and rabbit stay away from it because they don't like the smell. And it pairs beautifully with so many perennials. It looks nice next to the sedum. It also works great with things like peonies and roses earlier in the spring. So a really great perennial. Well, it wouldn't be a garden center shopping trip if I didn't go home with something. And here is my pick for today. I am buying 3 of these penstemon mountain treats. It has such a beautiful light pink coloration, and from a few feet afar, they kind of look like foxgloves. So I know exactly where I'm going to plant them when I get home and before we get rain this afternoon. So I hope that you've enjoyed checking out what my Home Depot has in stock in late July, and I hope that you can find some of these varieties near you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.